Good evening, everyone. It was an interesting topic when I chose it. Is yoga a religion? A little on the esoteric side, not as likely to bring folks out as yoga and sex, improving your practice, or stuff like that. So a little further in and a little further out than those topics. So I'm glad you've come out for it. I think it's an important question for a lot of different reasons, and an interesting one from mine and apparently your point of view. I wore this shirt today, my home t-shirt, one of several that I have. And I'll start off. Usually I speak for a little while and then we turn it over to questions and comments. But I'm going to start by asking you a question about what is Om. Now, who here is not a yoga student, doesn't do any yoga of any kind whatsoever? Okay. So I'm not going to expect you to answer the question. Everyone else must have some idea, some thought as to what Om is. So I'm interested in hearing what you think it is. I will sit here for a half hour until Natalia.
Sound of unity and harmony.
The sound of
unity and harmony.
The sound of unity and harmony. Okay, Kristen.
I think it's a pure vibration. It's like you're trying to make your sound that is the essence of vibration. So you feel when you chant Om or say Om that the that it vibrates in, like she says, like in unity. It makes you more aware of the vibration of everything else around you, because no vibration can exist without other vibrations. They're all relative to each other, so it brings everything in and also out at the same time.
Other thoughts? Definition? Linda?
I think it includes all sounds, so it's a pure original to me, encompassing all sounds, and it's a way to remove obstacles before practice.
Yeah.
For me, I consider it the beginning, middle, and end of everything. So it's complete encompassment. I also think about it in the terms of the beginning of the universe, that it was the initial. So before there was anything, there was, I guess it was kind of the initial thought, the generative sound of the universe.
The beginning of time. Okay. Other thoughts?
George O'Keeffe once said, "I can't sing, so I paint." And I was like, I can't sing, so I practice yoga. Because it's the closest I can get to channeling that, whatever it is, you know? But singers, to me, are people who, like, in a way, they're yogis, because if they're singing from that place of vibration, it comes right out. I just don't have it, but so I do poses and breathe, and that's how I channel it. But so to me, it's like that sound is, like she said, it's very pure,
Let me phrase the question in a slightly different way. What is the classical definition of Om? Classical in the sense of Raja Yoga, Patanjali Yoga. Okay. There is, and one of the reasons I had this discussion is I've read the sutras lots and lots and lots of times, and I've memorized them, I've studied them, and I've talked about them, talked with other people about them. The Iyengars often refer to them. And so I'm rereading a certain section, and I got to a section that talks about Om. It's very early on in the sutras, and it really starts, well, the Om section actually starts in the 27th sutra, in the first pada. And it says, Tasya Vachakaha Pranavaha, means the actual literal translation means his designator is Om. Designator, who's his, what are we talking about here? The 26, 25, 24, 23, the 4 sutras before that talk about Ishvara. Now, Ishvara in the Yoga Sutras is God. So, Om is the designator, the symbol, the representation, the conjuring up of God. So, I thought, well then, here we just talk about God, and does that then make yoga a religion? Because quite frankly, I don't think of yoga as a religion in the same way. Well, how many of you are Christians? Okay. How many of you are Buddhist? Okay. Jews? All right. Anybody something else? Yes?
I don't believe in this. I hate to say atheist, because to me that's a non-religion. I like to think rationalist.
Rationalist, okay. Secular humanist?
Maybe something like that.
Okay. Yes.
No, I'm not.
You're in that group.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I looked up religion. There were like 6 definitions, but the first 3 really spoke to, if I say, playing the drums is my religion, we can use that kind of phrase, but it doesn't mean what we're talking about here. So there are a few definitions like that that I left out, and they're the 4th, 5th, and 6th definitions. But the first definition given was belief in a divine or superhuman power or powers to be obeyed and worshipped as the creator, parentheses S, and ruler, parentheses S, of the universe. Belief in a divine or superhuman power or powers to be obeyed and worshipped as the creators and rulers of the universe, or creator and ruler of the universe. That's the first definition of a religion, belief in a divine or superhuman power. You have to obey and worship him or her, or them, and they create and rule the universe.
Is that and or obey and worship? Or
And worship.
obey and worship?
The second is expression of this belief in conduct and ritual. So if I do puja, all right, prayers and bowings before altars and things like that, that's religion also. The third is any specific system of belief, worship, or conduct, etc., often involving a code of ethics and a philosophy. So there are 3 related but different definitions of what a religion is. What does that word mean? A belief in powers, powerful beings, entities who rule, create the universe, that we worship and obey. The expressions of that belief, the rituals, if you will, that come from that belief and that honor that belief. And any system, organization, if you will. So if Christianity is a system, Buddhism is a system, or systems, really. They're different sects and groups. Judaism, Hinduism, all these various classical organized religions that we think of as religions. So we use the word that way. So does yoga fit into any of that? Belief in a divine or superhuman power or powers to be obeyed and worshipped as the creator and ruler of the universe. Well, there's this postulation in the sutras about this being, Ishvara, who is sort of a super soul. That's the way it's described. A special Purusha. Purusha is classically who we truly are, our inner beings. We're Purushas. We're divine, little sparks of the divine, separate. Each of us is a separate Purusha who is a manifestation of the divine element of the universe. And Ishvara is described as a particular Purusha, a special Purusha, who is untouched by the afflictions of life, actions, and the results and impressions produced by those actions. So he, usually referred to as he, but it's really non-gender specific, isn't prey to all the stuff of life that we are. He's the teacher even of the ancients, one of the sutras says. So all knowledge comes from Ishvara. So belief in a divine or superhuman power, that sounds pretty superhuman, pretty divine. Expression of this belief in conduct and ritual. If we sit in the beginning of a class and do an invocation and chant Om together, or just chant Om together, this is a ritual, is it not? Any specific system of belief, worship, or conduct, often involving a code of ethics and a philosophy. Well, yoga is one of the 6 classical systems of Hindu philosophy. Mimamsa, Jnana, Vedanta, I don't remember them all, quite frankly. So in that sense, it's a system. Patanjali has this whole Raja Yoga system. There are other systems, Tantra Yoga. Code of ethics. You have the yamas, niyamas. And in fact, B.K. Iyengar, in one of his discussions, speaks of the purpose of religion being as a moral guide for people, a code of ethics, essentially, how we should act. The yamas and niyamas don't actually say how we should act. What they say is, if we do these things, certain things follow. And presumptively, if we don't do these things, those things won't follow, other things won't follow. Okay. So the tricky part for me in the discussion is the question of belief. It's there in each of these definitions: belief in a divine power, superhuman powers, expression of this belief, any specific system of belief, worship, or conduct. And it's the issue of belief that causes me to ask the question as to whether yoga is a religion or not. If you read the Yoga Sutras, read the writings of B.K. Iyengar, read the Bhagavad Gita, read any of the scriptures of yoga, and take what is written in those writings and say, I believe that's the way things are, then that's a belief system. Okay. And in that sense, I would say that yoga is a religion. If you're reading something, or somebody's telling you something, or you're looking at different things and inferring that things seem to be this way, those are belief systems. And in that sense, then, yoga is a religion by these definitions of the word. For me, yoga really hasn't been and isn't about belief. It is about experience, what I feel, understand, perceive, as a result of doing yogic practices, and particular practices aside, how that affects the way I just experience and see the world, what goes on around me. in that sense, it really isn't about belief. I can say that I believe that if I lift my thighs in Tadasana, in mountain pose, that I'll be taller. Well, I don't have to believe that. That's an experience. And somebody can say, oh, I don't believe that's true. That doesn't really affect me. They can believe or not believe that it's true. It doesn't shake my knowledge, not belief, knowledge that that in fact is the case. That's the way it is. It's not a belief system. So if we start talking about Ishvara, God, this divine entity, this special Purusha, if I have no experience of this being, this entity out there, and I then begin to postulate, well, there is this divine being, there's God, Jesus, Muhammad, Ganesh, name the gods, various gods, or prophets, then I'm working on a belief system, which is different from an experience. I mean, you can have an experience of your belief, but it's a belief. And it's different from an actual experience of. In that sense, then, to me, yoga isn't a religion. Because for me, it's really about what I experience, what I perceive directly as being real. So then I'm sort of caught in this place, and it's why the question came up for me and why I posited it as the subject of discussion. As to how much of yoga for me and for you is about believing something, and how much is it really about what we're experiencing. It doesn't mean that we can't take in information and act in a certain way based on that information to have an experience for ourselves. That's not about believing. It is to a certain extent about trusting somebody enough to take the information they have and whether it's worth pursuing or not. So in a sense, there is some belief there. I believe this person knows enough what they're talking about for me to go on and fiddle around with what they're saying I should do or can do to see what my own experience is. But the experience itself isn't really about belief. It's about what your actual experience is and how clear your perception of your experience is. Because sometimes we think we experience and know certain things, and somebody says, yeah, but isn't that really what you're experiencing? And we go, oh, well, actually, yeah, that's closer to what I'm feeling, experiencing, seeing, perceiving than the way I described it or the way I thought I was seeing or experiencing it. So I'm not saying that we have to be devoid of guidance or information from outside ourselves, but whatever information or guidance we receive is there to propel us, to direct us toward our own experience. And then we can find out whether we're experiencing God, if you will, or not. Since it all comes down to superhuman beings, call them God or divine consciousness or the great cosmic ooze or whatever you want to refer to this super entity or entities as, or this system that we get involved with, or systems that we get involved with. So that's where the question arose for me. And it's come up before. I remember when I first started to teach yoga back in the early 70s, mid-70s or so, I was teaching for the Montgomery County Recreation Department. Taught there for many years. And they used the schools and various centers in the counties. It was Montgomery County where I was, Montgomery and Prince George's County. Told the classes in. And someone protested there being yoga classes it was in a public school, because I'm not supposed to have religious activities in public schools in those days anyway. And so they said yoga's a religion. The authorities came to me and said, well, what are we going to do about this? I said, yoga's not a religion. There's no churches, none of this stuff. It's about your own experience of things. And It's very directly related to what we do and what we perceive based on what we do. So I had to write this little rebuttal to the idea of whether yoga is a religion or not, which apparently was successful enough. We kept offering classes in the public schools, so it worked adequately at the time. But the question has lingered and come back as I've gone on teaching over the years. And it became a little more poignant for me as I really sat and studied and thought about and read those sections in the Yoga Sutras on Ishvara, on God. Because my own perception of the God aspect of yoga is not of separate entities out there, which is the classic definition. That's not my experience, but of some essence to the universe that, what does it say, creates and rules. Creates, I can go with. Rules, sort of, I don't know that it rules the universe, but there are cosmic laws, if you will, that determine how the universe goes. Gravity, if you want to put them in physics type terms, attractions and repulsions, all those sorts of things. That's just the way the universe works, except for when it doesn't. You go from Newtonian physics to quantum physics, and then all the rules change, but there still wind up being different rules, different sorts of observable, repeatable, predictable phenomena. Okay, and so I have some experience in my own being of that, of certain repeatable, predictable experiences, patterns that you could call a law or a rule. But for me to create a system that describes that in really concrete terms and to devise a lot of rituals with respect to that that are purported to invoke that state of consciousness, I don't have that experience. That part doesn't work for me. It is rather just not a feeling, or not an idea, or not a belief, but an actual experience of the harmony and unitedness, connectedness, some of the words that you all used in talking about Om, the rhythm, the vibration of the universe. And if you want to call that God, I don't have any problem with that, except it's such a loaded word. That thread, that rhythm, that vibration. I do begin to have problems with it when you start setting up systems about it and mistake the system for what it is that the system's supposed to be about. And I do have problems with it when you set up rituals and dogma around it that get to begun to be taken for what it is that they are supposedly directed toward. But it's that underlying essence, that underlying vibration, if you will, that if you want to call that God and say that if there's a God then it's a religion, then I'm okay with it being a religion. If you have to say that I have to obey and worship, those are interesting words. Worship. Again, well, for many of us, that goes to ritualistic behavior. You go to places and do things, and that's worshiping. If I sit in the evening and watch the sun go down and am awed by the spectacular beauty and perfectness of it all, I think that's worshiping, in a way. I think that's, in some ways, real worship. So yes, I'm worshipful in that sense. Obey. Well, if it becomes clear to me that if I act in certain ways that are in harmony with that vibration and flow of the universe, then there are going to be certain results. And if I don't act in harmony with that, in concordance with that, if I disobey, in a sense, not the usual sense of the word, that there are going to be other consequences, usually less desirable, then yes, attempting to adhere to certain principles or guidelines or observable, predictable patterns, laws, if you will, then yes, in that sense of the word, yoga is a religion. But it's just the usual sense of the word, with all its baggage, if you will, of dogma, system, ritual, authority, hierarchy, all the rest of it. If that's the way we're going to define religion, then it isn't. There is an evolutionary element to this. One thing does lead to another, which leads to another. So I was sitting on a plane coming back from India one time, sitting next to an Indian gentleman. We wound up talking about yoga and Hinduism and religion. And I was talking about, direct experience and all that stuff, and what has this got to do with little statues of Ganesha and Nataraj and chanting the Upanishads and all the rest of that? He says, it's a little like the Jewish questions at Passover, really. Certain people are at certain levels and they need to be responded to in certain ways. So for those who the idea of this divine essence that permeates everything and creates a harmony and rhythm that we can align ourselves with or not, well, that's a little on the far outside for some folks. Not quite understandable. So to then set up rituals and images and things that allow them to at least contemplate, think about something grander than that, is a way. But the more knowledgeable and sophisticated people then study the scriptures and don't need the images and the rituals and the dogma, and they can take the words and think about them and contemplate those. And that's another level. There's an evolution from that first person to that second person. But then there's the person who doesn't need the scriptures and doesn't need the words and doesn't need the teachers, that has an experience of what's going on. And that's an evolution past those first two. So there is definitely an evolutionary process involved in what I might call waking up. There was, sorry, Rebecca.
I think that most people, or some people, faith would actually say their faith is experiential, that it's not a belief. It's something that they know to be true. And it seems like in a lot of cases it might be the result of an experience that you're talking about. So like maybe you get this experience, and it's sort of like you get struck by a Cupid or something, and you have to be a yogi or a pastor, or who's going to explain it for you. And then chances are they haven't read your book for a really long time. And it's just sort of an explanation of an experience, which is human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you talk about Shraddha, which is in that sutra that you mentioned, that's how I understand the word faith there. Not that some guy in an orange robe comes up to me and says, the world's going to end on May 20th. Right. They don't usually do that. There is this divine entity in the universe. Okay, not like that, but having had some taste, some sort of experience that maybe isn't immediate anymore, but was real and rememberable, that the experience existed, and that because of that, it's possible for that to reoccur, for you to touch that place again. And you act in such a way that you have faith in that possibility. So that I can understand faith in that way, which is different to me from Rabbi so-and-so says that if I do so-and-so, this is going to happen. And I have faith in Rabbi so-and-so, and so, it must be true. And that's a different kind of faith.
the other day, it was my dad's birthday, and he was at the Mayo Clinic visiting his brother, and he called and he picked up this pamphlet about yoga. And in the pamphlet it says yoga, and I take it means asana by yoga, is not a religion. And I used to say that to people, I teach at my church, that this is not a religion, it's consistent with this, but it's become too easy an answer. And so I had this long conversation with my father about how it's much more like a religion than it's not. And that there is this set of ethical precepts, and we gather in fellowship to be together, and we have rituals, and all the things that you described, that it fits into these definitions. And I realize that sometimes it's a little too easy because I want to make it palatable to people who are afraid that, like the school system or the recreational department, or people who are worried that they have these beliefs in their own religion, and that this might shake those beliefs or change them in some way, or take them away from something that they hold so close to them. And I find that I don't want to reassure them that it won't change them, because I think it will. And I think it might, cause someone to examine their beliefs. And so I'm changing I'm grappling, I don't really know what it is, but I think it's important when someone asks, is yoga a religion, that I have a little bit more broad and ambiguous answer, just to give them a little more information about what I understand yoga to be, just to sort of for a little more fulsome disclosure of what they might be getting into.
Yeah, I think ambiguity can be our friend at times. a little wiggle room for things. One of the places where yoga, and it's interesting to say whether is a religion or is religious. They seem to be two different things to me. Being a religion, being this whole systematic thing, this organized thing, this hierarchical thing, this dogmatic aspect to things. That being religion, and religious relating more to the experiential, essential aspect of it. When you take the derivation, the root of the word religious, it is, pardon my Latin, religare. Religare. Ligare means to bind to, is the way the dictionary describes it. But I think of it as to join or connect. Binding is that. Joining and connecting, hooking together. And is, again, just like repeat and remember and all the re's that we have in our language. So it's to reconnect is what religion is. That's the way I understand yoga in a religious sense, is that the word, of course, yoga means yuj. It comes from the root yuj and means to yoke or bind together or connect. So ligare and yuj seem to me to have the same meaning, this connectedness, this linking together, this hooking together, joining, unitedness, unity. And the re part, to repeat, to go over again, is the only reason any of us is looking for anything, it seems to me, is because we don't have it yet. If we had something, we wouldn't be looking for it. You're only looking for what you haven't got. So, all of us, I would venture to say, at least on some level, have lost the ongoing direct experience of our connectedness with everything, the universe, if you will. We have smaller connections of varying degrees with people, places, things, ideas, experiences, all of that. But the feeling of being totally, deeply connected, unassailably, not I believe I am, or it's a great idea and I think I must be because it's such a cool thing. But yeah, I really am connected to everything. Not because I've done these practices and I've attained these great states, but because everybody's connected to everything, and it's just so clear. Not because it's such an unassailable idea, but because every fiber of your being feels, knows, experiences that. So I suspect that at least some of us have had touches of that, but it gets lost. We forget. Which is why Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, that sutra, faith, energy, force, dynamic power, and memory are such important aspects of attaining samadhi, of waking up. So we forget. One of those of you who can remember who Ram Dass was, he was Timothy Leary's buddy, Richard Alpert, in Harvard when they were all ingesting all sorts of wild and interesting stuff and having these experiences. And he went off to India and got involved with his guru and became Ram Dass. And came back and wrote this really famous book called Be Here Now. The sort of the motto of his whole trip was love, serve, remember. And the remember part was remembering who we really are. I mean, that's the definition of yoga. Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is to still the fluctuations of the mind, but tada drashtu swarupe vastanam. The purpose of stilling the fluctuations of the mind is so we experience, know, see who we really are. Which is, maybe it's a separate Purusha, maybe it isn't, this little soul or not, but is in fact connected to everything else. So we remember, and if you remember, that's a conceptual process. So it means you're not connected. If you have to remember, you're not connected. Okay? Because if I'm connected, I don't need to remember it. I am connected. So when you don't have that direct experience of that connection, then you need to remember that that is there, and that faith of that memory of that experience keeps you moving along toward that reconnection, that process of reconnection, of religare. And so religion, to me, the heart of it, all the religions really, and from what reading I've done and discussions I've had, the sources of all the religions lie in someone or some groups or several people's actual experience of this connectedness, and then their attempt to describe that connectedness, and the unfortunate human tendency to then organize that so it can be conveyed much more effectively. And some people convey it better than others, so they're higher up the totem pole than others, and pretty soon it's all a mess. And religion has not been a force of connectedness in the world. It has been a force of great division in the world. And overall, I'm sure you know there have been charities and wonderful things, but if you look at the grander picture of religion's role, religion in this systemized, organized, dogmatic sense, has been much more force for division and separation and destruction, physical, material, in the world than it has been for connectedness, unfortunately. And I think it's because people forget what it was that where this came from, or they never knew in the first place. And they've heard about it from somebody else who doesn't really know either, but has adopted this in order to gain power, wealth, whatever it is, whatever goodies they get out of telling other people how they're supposed to be and how it really is. So I think we need to avoid the organized aspect of things, since over time it really hasn't worked too well, and try to get back to the direct experience aspect of this. And sure, we can get information from other people and other sources, books, lots of other sources in this day and age, media. Not as explanations for, but as guides and prompts for us to do the work ourselves and to act in such a way as to open the doors to that feeling of connectedness. And in that sense, to me, yoga really is religious. By its very definition, the word itself implies that. Yoga, link, connection, join, bind together. And since we tend to forget that and need to be reminded from others and through our own practice to relink, to reconnect. It isn't that we're ever not connected. We're always connected. We just lose track of it. We've lost that feeling. Okay, and how to get that feeling back is why various practices get undertaken. But I think it's important to remember that the practices are not what it's about. People get lost there too. Religious practices are not religion in the realest sense of the word, of reconnecting. They may be helpful, they may not. They may help us with that evolutionary step-by-step process to move from needing gross representations to concepts on the way to experience, but they aren't the experience themselves. And so that's why the idea of religion, of relinking, of remembering, of reconnecting, of getting back to what is postulated by yoga, and my experience, in spite of so much evidence to the contrary, the innate, whole, divine quality of each person's existence.